All right, I'll call this April 17th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting to order at 6:32. And first we'll do a roll call. Syed Safavian. Ajay Chakrapani.
Here.
John Bachman.
Here.
I'm Mike Brusco here. We expect Suda to be here soon, and we know that Hisham is running about 30 minutes late. Chair Bachman has an excused absence this evening. So we've got roll done. Are there any changes anybody would like to suggest for the agenda this evening? Seeing none, we'll call the agenda approved by common consent. And then approval of the minutes from our April 3rd, 2025 regular meeting. Any changes to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the minutes approved by common consent. And next on the agenda are public comments. These are public comments that are not related to the business that we have this evening, which includes a public hearing on amendments to the Code Title 21. So if you have public comments that are other than to the SMC Title 21 Code, you have 3 minutes. Who'd like to speak first?
James Eastman, East Lake Sammamish Parkway. I'm a fairly curious individual, and getting ready for this meeting, I decided I was going to start looking at what's coming through the pipeline development-wise. And I pulled up probably 5 or 6 plats, and I noticed that in 4 out of 5, that all the plats I pulled up, none of them were submitting for their density allocation. I attended that, I think it's North Point, or the subdivision plat that just got approved by the hearing examiner. That's kind of what got me going. Was they're allowed 18 units of density, but they only used 12. I thought, man, that's strange. Shouldn't they have value in the density? So I started pulling up every single plat over the last 5 years, till about we changed development regulations between 1 and 2, and then to what we have now. And it was that way across the board. And I found this one subdivision in particular, the Bright Carrier plat, which is on Southeast 4th there, where they've just right next to town center. And that subdivision, I believe, was allowed 18 units of density. And they only did 10. I thought, that's really interesting. Like, what's the difference? Then I went quarter mile away to a very similar location, the Carrier subdivision, which was done under development regs phase 1, and that had 36 that was allowed, and they built 36. So clearly in my mind, it's like, okay, like development regs phase 1 and 2, and I think Paul and I both said this when he passed it. They were going to take the city from an R6 to an R4, or from an R4 to an R3. And I think if you created an Excel sheet, you would end up at R3. So created this glass ceiling with those updates. We haven't rolled some of those things back as part of this comp plan update and as part of middle housing. So I'm not sure if we're going to break through that glass ceiling or not to get above an R3 on our zoning. I don't know if this middle housing will do that. Some things that concern me are if we are going to do middle housing and we can't mass clear and grade, you're trying to fit 12 houses on an acre, but you're having to come back and dig out each one like in this very tight space. So that would be one that you should incentivize right away. Second is review times. I think maybe that Bright subdivision, they wanted a short plat because they go through way faster than a long plat. And then there's a few other things that we can do to utilize our land more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Paul?
Mic is on and ready. Okay, thanks. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. I sent you a non-agenda comment today of what I sent City Council, which was the 5th of 5 verbal comments I gave over roughly a 9 or 10 day period that in sequence make not the case, but sort of discuss an overview of what's been going on with what I've been proposing the last year or two, which is to meet a different set of target numbers in our comp plan tied to citywide housing imbalance that are not tied to the growth target. Gave out jelly beans because I gave all the other commissioners those, and I talked to them about it tying to Ronald Reagan, which is to trust but verify this information. Today in the email I sent, I mentioned I would give sort of a clear simplicities. I have a few topics to talk about. Don't have time for tons, but some of them. What I've been talking about isn't meeting all needs in the region. That's a regional target. Sammamish keeps its regional target low, which I support. What I've been talking about is meeting some needs for the internal makeup of our community, economic and workforce and demographic needs. That's not in our comp plan. I've been suggesting that we add that to the comp plan. The next piece, let me see which one I want to talk about. Yes, I was talking in these 5 articles about adding 5,000 B and C units for market rate housing alongside A. And I'm not going to repeat everything. I will just say that doing that would equal a single family equivalent of roughly 17 to 1,800 houses, which is about a 4-to-1 ratio on traffic and is about a third of the growth our community has seen. And that would meet about 70% of our needs, which I've outlined. I'm not going to go over that. A couple pieces that I haven't chatted about, and the others may have to wait for another meeting, is I suggest that you really read the comp plan. I appreciate what community development has said, that it can be flexible, that growth targets aren't necessarily minimums or maximums, but yet when I read the comp plan, if I didn't attend any of these meetings, I would never see that anywhere. And it would be crystal clear that it was aiming for 2,100 affordable. I think we need to change some of the language so the general public knows this.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else? And please state your name when you're up there. And
wrong piece of paper. Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Gray. I'm a longtime resident of Sammamish for 42 years. First time here to these meetings. I moved here before any traffic lights existed, back when 228th was actually closed due to a slide, and there was no plans to open it at the time. Crazy to think of that now. Anyways, I'm here tonight to share some concerns and opinions that I have around the movement to create affordable housing in Sammamish. And my topic tonight is specifically in regards to the method proposed to fund this activity. So as I understand it, when a new subdivision is being built, 10% of these new homes must meet affordable housing standards. This means 10% of these homes must be built and sold at a substantial loss. Alternatively, as I understand it, there's a fee in lieu option where you can pay roughly $35 a foot for for every home being built in lieu of building the affordable homes. Both of these approaches add a very significant cost to the bottom line for any development. The added cost obviously has to come from somewhere. Unfortunately, as it stands, this added cost is ultimately going to come from the landowner, not from the developer. Developers will simply go elsewhere to develop if they cannot meet their profit margins here. It's just a reality. This economic pressure directly affects land values and ultimately impacts landowners such as myself. Assuming developers will shoulder this cost is short-sighted. Passing the added cost on to the end consumer simply raises home prices, which is in direct conflict with affordability. This only leaves the landowner to shoulder these added costs, and it's simply not fair that landowners single-handedly bear the burden of these significant costs. They're big numbers. So, in my opinion, if we stay on the current path to funding affordable housing, I suspect what's going to ultimately happen is developers are going to continue to leave the area and do business elsewhere. There's a lot of places they can build. The reality is Sammamish needs developers more than developers need Sammamish. And if growth of any housing type is truly the goal of the city and the community, it seems we have opposing things here. So I ask the council to explore other means to fund affordable housing effort. Don't assume developers will absorb it, because they won't. And don't expect individual landowners to shoulder it. It's just simply not fair. If building affordable housing is truly the desire of the city and its community, then it's only fair that the cost be shared on a more widespread basis. In closing, and for the record, I am not, nor have I ever been, affiliated with a developer or a builder or any affiliates in any way. I am simply a retired, longtime landowner, resident, and taxpayer of Sammamish. And in closing, I thank you all for all you do to try to balance this challenging reality of growth. You guys have a hard job. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you. Anybody else? You can make comments. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Colin Malsum, and I'm addressing you today regarding the planned short plat development at 19641 Southeast 24th Way. Community Development Director David Pyle was kind enough to speak with me about my concerns, specifically in relation to the city's mandatory affordable housing program outlined in Chapter 2110 of the Sammamish Code. When I asked David what I could do, he advised me to speak here in front of you guys today to express my concerns. My main concern involves the application of Section 2110-030 General Requirements, which states at least 10% of the units in new housing developments in the area specified in SMC 2110-020 must be affordable to households earning up to 80% AMI adjusted for household size. Respectfully, I am asking for clarification on how this requirement is intended to apply to a short plat creating a single-family lot. Given the undividable nature of a single dwelling unit, it is unclear how one practically constructs 10% of a single-family home to meet this requirement. I have no problem with 10% of 10 lots or one affordable unit or an in lieu fee. However, charging the same amount for a fractional portion, for example, 0.1 or 0.2 of a unit, makes no sense and unfairly burdens me with a disproportionate amount. Furthermore, my primary concern centers on the new required affordable housing in lieu fee associated with the short plat. As a lifelong Sammamish resident who intends to build my own home on our family's land and remain an active community member, this fee presents a significant and, in my view, unfair financial disadvantage. Why should I have to subsidize housing for someone else? I go to work every day and work hard just like everybody else and everyone here, and nobody is subsidizing the cost of building my home. It seems counterintuitive that a lifelong resident contributing to Sammamish by building here would bear a large financial burden for others' housing. This projected cost severely impedes my ability to realize my long-term goal of building my house and raising my family soon, which will likely force me to relocate outside of Sammamish, the community I have always called home. Thank you for your time and consideration.
And thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, we're having one hand raised online. Kevin, I am switching you over to panelists.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, good evening, Planning Commission members. I am Kevin Schmelik, and I've lived in Sammamish for the past 10 years. I'm here tonight to surface a concern that's come up during our project guidance reviews with the city's development team. I surfaced this during the City Council meeting on Tuesday earlier this week and wanted to share that here as well. For years, we had dreamed of building a house in the local area that could accommodate our family over time and properly accommodate for medical conditions and disabilities of our parents and other family members. We found the perfect property, a 3.68 acre lot zoned R1 on the north side of Rock Meadow, which we purchased in October 2024. Our intent was to rebuild a home where the existing single family residence is located for our family. Due to the disabilities already mentioned, our goal is to build a home that can accommodate walkers and wheelchairs. But during project guidance reviews, we found that as of January 1st, 2025, there is now a maximum building footprint of 3,000 square feet, which is located in the Sammamish Development Code, Chapter 21, TAC 04, TAC 30 on district standards, density, and dimensions. There is not a way to fit a house for our family of 5 plus parents and or family members on a single level with an attached garage within the 3,000 square foot maximum building footprint requirement. Additionally, there are no exemptions or footnotes for this new code requirement. The workaround for the current code is to construct several multi-story buildings that are all less than the 3,000 square foot building footprint maximum. This would require an elevator. Not only does this create safety concerns, but it also adds additional installation and maintenance costs. The only remaining option for a single family home is the narrowly construed variance process, which is the comment that a city planner made in a review, which would end up adding more costs than time to the project and unknown response to the city, as we are currently working on this process. Affordable housing is important, and we're on board with prioritizing that for the city as a core theme, but blanket regulations of 3,000 square foot building footprints across all zoning districts without any exemption criteria is not the proper method to achieve the intent. I request the Planning Commission consider updating this 3,000 square foot max building footprint code to properly consider edge cases such as ours and others, as well as consider alternatives to a building footprint limitation that both promote affordable housing while also ensuring homeowners have flexibility to design and build homes that meet their unique needs and situations. In the near term, we're scheduling a follow-up meeting with the planning team to review our situation and variability or the viability of a variance request before we spend the time and money in both fees and additional design work and rework that are required to do this process. Thank you for your time.
And Kevin, thank you. Okay. Anybody else online? Okay. So thank you for all of your comments, everyone. Next, we'll go to presentation for this evening and discussion about the code changes. So, Evan?
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Bresco, Planning Commission. Tonight, we are continuing work we started at a workshop on March 3rd. This is part of a docket request the city submitted late last year, knowing that with all the code updates we were making around the adoption of the comprehensive plan, we would need to come back and clean some things up. We consider these ultimately fairly minor code amendments, but ones that we wanted to talk through with you and get input on, which we started on March 6th. And tonight we're returning with red line code language and those updates for your consideration for recommendation to the City Council. They're slated to have a workshop on May 6th and consider these for adoption on May 20th. So I'll just go ahead and dig in here. There are varying levels of complexity of the issues, and we're starting out really light. So the code issue that was identified here is that there are a couple missing definitions in 2104.040B. That's the general definition section for the development code. And we were missing a definition for a hedge. And the proposed amendment, which you'd see in Exhibit 1, was to add the definition of a hedge as a row of 5 or more trees of the same species, densely planted to provide a landscape barrier or screen, maintained with ongoing pruning or shearing. The next definition that was missing from the section was of area median income, and this is important because this is used to determine levels of affordability. And the amendment here is to add that definition, which specifies that area median income is based on the housing and urban development data, and that should HUD no longer produce that data, the city is able to produce its own method for determining area median income. The next issue gets a little bit more complicated. So this one is around the final approval of subdivision. And currently, the code gives the final approval authority to the city council. And this ends up proving a bit of an issue because it gives the impression that at the point of final approval of a subdivision, that there are some discretionary actions the council may take, when in truth, ultimately, it's a ministerial step that wraps up a years-long process of site planning, site improvements, preliminary approvals, conditions placed on the subdivision by the hearing examiner, and ultimately, once all that is completed and reviewed and inspected by the city and deemed complete, the project comes in for final approval and for issuing a plat map with the recording office with the county. So that's the step we're looking at here, is that very end of the process. And what we're recommending is that instead of it going in front of the city council, where really they don't have a lot of options but to move it forward, because again, we've been through a years-long process and all the requirements have been met. Instead, we suggest that it's a hearing examiner approval. And this also makes sense because the hearing examiner is the one who does the preliminary approval process and understands the project, and also has placed conditions on the subdivision, which at this point have been met. So here's just a site, a reference to changes in state law in 2017 that give the city the authority to kind of outsource this final approval process to a different body. And again, we're recommending that be the hearing examiner. And the changes you'd see in Exhibit 2, both swap city council for the hearing examiner for the approval, and we've also added language that clarifies how the final approval processes work. Currently, it's just captured in one paragraph, and it's a little confusing because a short subdivision has a different approval process than a subdivision. A short subdivision is approved in-house by the department, where a subdivision is approved by the city council, but we're recommending through the hearing examiner. So in the red line edits, you'll see that we've clarified that there's a difference in the two processes, and recommend that change to the hearing examiner. And I can move through them all as one, and then we can come back to questions, or we could stop along the way, whatever. I'll keep going.
If you'll have a preference to continue through, and then take notes, and we'll come back.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. The third here was clarifying one of our development standard tools, and that's a tool for building height measurement. The current code is confusing and a little difficult to administer. It becomes a bit unclear which method of measurement you use and where you measure from. For example, I believe it specifies now measuring from the crown of the street, and it creates a very ununiform way of determining building height. So the amendments you'll see in Exhibit 3 replace the more confusing crown of the road method with what I think is a fairly industry standard method of creating a single plane measurement method that uses the average existing grade of each wall segment, and then creates an average existing grade plane that is used to determine to measure from for the height of the building. So it would simplify that first measurement pretty greatly. The second issue you'll find is actually in the same section, and it has to do to clarify what a sidewall is. And this was an issue. It reads currently that a sidewall will be no more than 24 feet high, but it doesn't specify exactly when that applies. And what the amendment here that we're recommending is clarifying that a sidewall is generally parallel to a side lot line and is located closer than 2 feet to a 5-foot side yard setback or 4 feet to any larger side yard setback. So it specifies in what instances that 24-foot height maximum applies, and that's when you're within these distances to the setbacks. The next tool is to clarify when a fence and a retaining wall or rockery would be measured together or independently. So think of this as the edge of a property has a retaining wall and somebody wants to put a fence on top of it. The maximum height of both of those combined, I think, is 12 feet. But if measured independently, the maximum height of a retaining wall can be 8 feet and a fence can be 6 feet, which totals to 14 feet. So we need to clarify when those would be measured together and independently. And the proposed amendment here is that fences are measured independently from retaining walls if there is a minimum of 2 feet of plantable space from the back of the retaining wall. So if that fence is set back 2 feet or more of plantable space, you can put shrubs and veggies there, then it can be measured independently and you can reach that higher height. But if that space doesn't exist, then the lower height limit applies. Yes, the next one, this comes from the Washington State Department of Commerce, and they reviewed our development regulations with the updated comp plan, but unfortunately provided us comments kind of just after we crossed the finish line. And they raised concerns about the restrictions that we'd placed on the occupancy and locations of permanent supportive housing and emergency shelters. We have to show that we have capacity for 401 emergency beds and 499 permanent supportive housing units. And they said that the regulations that we had in place, which I have here in this table, of the occupancy restrictions of no more than 10 persons in a permanent supportive housing unit or no more than 50 in a shelter, along with the spacing requirements of no facilities within a mile of each other or a half mile of each other, would effectively kill the ability for the city to show capacity if these properties were built, if these facilities were built. So staff made a recommendation to the commission on March 6th that we get rid of both the occupancy and spacing requirements. And the commission provided feedback that, yes, it makes sense to remove the occupancy requirements, but instead of eliminating the spacing requirements entirely, reducing it down to no units or facilities could be within a quarter mile of each other. And David and I spent some time looking at the bonus parcels, which again, you'll remember those are the religious or municipally owned parcels that we allow extra density on for the siting of, very low affordability units. And it seems like this quarter-mile radius would allow us to, if these facilities were built, still demonstrate we have capacity in the remaining available bonus parcels. So we think this is a safe approach that we can use to demonstrate that we have capacity. So next we turn to chapter 2110, the affordable housing chapter. There are a couple things that we wanted to address here. First, the first batch of things were really just cleaning up the code section. There was some repetitive language, like applicability was stated twice and the affordability requirements were stated twice. Some things were in the wrong sections, and the calculation method was needed clarifying. So we proposed, obviously, to remove the redundancies. We move all the fee in lieu requirements under a fee in lieu management section, which we call it now. We correct the square footage calculation to clarify that it's based on the total floor area of all eligible units for fee in lieu. We also add a definition in this chapter alone for total floor area as all habitable living space measured from exterior walls. And then we clarify when when whole unit alternative compliance methods may be used. The next round of amendments come from a request directly from City Council earlier this year. They have been hearing feedback around the exemption criteria and wanted the commission to take another crack at looking at if 1,000 square feet is big enough, or if we should consider a larger square footage exemption from the requirements of this chapter. They also wanted the commission to consider, should this chapter apply for instances of homes being rebuilt. They also tasked the commission with considering if the 0.5 roundup to one whole unit was appropriate, or if we should just get rid of rounding. I think this is a leftover question of how should additions be considered. Additions don't really apply here because these are for new housing developments. So the proposed amendments are based on the conversations that we had with you all on March 6th, and from feedback we've heard from folks like the master builders that 1,500 square feet feels like a more appropriate exemption. Exempting homes that are being rebuilt is appropriate, and this would be cases of loss through an act of God, or even instances where folks just choose to tear down and rebuild. And we also remove the rounding requirements and clarify how the number of required affordable units are determined, and that whole number of units must build a unit on site, and that all fractional units must either pay a fee in lieu to meet the requirements, or should they choose, they could build a whole unit on site. And lastly, this is a more simple one. Currently, there's existing language in 2104-030 for density calculations that uses a now outdated method of calculation, which is lot coverage. Additionally, this section needed to clarify that it was a floor area calculation for commercial floor area. So the edits you'll find in Exhibit 7 simply remove the outdated method for calculation of lot coverage and then add the word commercial to floor area to specify that's what's being calculated. So that's it as far as the slide deck goes. David has added.
Yeah, if you could go back to the slide about the language about net floor area or whatever we're saying, whatever the term is, I always get it confused. I apologize. So we agreed with some of the comments that we'd received in writing from Mr. Stickney, and we have since republished the packet to incorporate those in there. There was a couple typos that we noted in there that Mr. Stickney picked up, so we do appreciate his comment on that. And that in fact we meant, it's just that's
the fourth bullet.
The fourth bullet. Total floor area. So the code uses multiple terms to calculate area for different purposes. So one thing to keep in mind is that this is really specifically intended to be used in this subsection with regard to calculating the in lieu fee related to the inclusionary affordable housing requirement. So this definition is specific to this section. Just wanted to highlight that there was a typo in the previous draft that was forwarded, and Mr. Stickney identified that. We appreciate that, and we have since corrected that and republished the packet.
Okay, you'll put the last slide up. So here's the process that we'll go through and what we'll want to accomplish. So we've gone through the 7 separate exhibits. All the major changes have been summarized. What we'll do is we want to make sure that if there's any questions for clarifications, that we do that now before the public hearing. And so I would just go through any questions around Exhibit 1, Exhibit 2, so forth. Then we'll do the public hearing, and then we'll debate. And our task during the debate is to make motion, if need be, amendments to the motion. What's suggested up here is if we like and see no changes needed for, say, Exhibits 2, 3, 4, 5, that we would group those together and say motion to accept those exhibits as presented. And then anything else, let's say there's a change to Exhibit 1, we would make a motion to pass that and then make the necessary amendment to that motion. So there's several steps to go in through here. The first of which is to work through any clarifying questions that we have on the exhibits. And so why don't we just start quickly with anybody has a question around Exhibit 1? So this was about definitions.
Right. If I remember the language correctly, it said a row of trees that are like a laurel. Is that a tree or a shrub? So should it say trees and shrubs? Thanks.
That makes sense.
Anything, actually, I had that same, because if there was, my question would have been, is there a particular reason to limit to trees which have, one versus a lot of branches coming up closer to the ground, so.
I would only say that the reason why it's focused on trees is its application to the city's tree retention requirements. And this comes from, I want to say, disagreement between neighbors around tree removal. And we have situations where one neighbor who might own a series of trees planted in a row that are excelsis cedar or Leland cypress that have been maintained like a hedge that want to remove that, and another neighbor on the other side who doesn't own it but who has benefited from the screening it has provided, and is taking issue with that and is filing code compliance case against that individual owner who is choosing to remove it. And it sometimes can become quite heated between neighbors, and we are put in a position where we're having to make a call about whether it's a hedge or not, and we have no guidance or definition for that in our code.
Yeah. So what I would say is after public hearing and debate, we'd need to decide if we should be clear about a hedge with shrubs, because they can grow quite tall as well and have much the same issues, is how we'd want to debate that one. Okay, any other questions, comments about Exhibit 1, the definitions?
David, question about the definition of hedges. Generally speaking, correct me if I'm wrong, the purpose of hedges is either noise barrier or privacy. But in this definition, it doesn't say if I plant a hedge that is going to take 15 years to reach to the goal that I wanted to have to provide either barrier for noise or barrier for privacy, it's not going to serve the purpose. So is there any need, do you see any need to identify the initial height of the hedges? If the plant is only 12 inches, it's going to take, let's say, 20 years to reach the goal of providing privacy or noise barrier. Should that be a consideration?
So this is not something that's an amenity that we require as a city. So we don't require, but for in the town center where we have landscape standards and some of our commercial zones where we have landscape standards, we still don't require hedges in those instances. There's a variety of ways that you can address screening and noise attenuation and light trespass and those kind of things. But in this case, this is really about something that someone put in at their own will. They didn't need a permit to plant it. We don't know, property might have sold and it's been maintained consistently or sporadically, but it has been maintained, and you can tell generally that it's been pruned a certain way. And somebody now, it's reached the end of its life cycle, or somebody doesn't like it and wants to reclaim that area on their property because they can consume quite a bit of space, and they want to remove it. And it's really about whether it's considered as a tree and regulated by our tree retention requirements, or whether it's some form of landscape feature, a hedge.
So it is not a requirement, that's what I'm hearing.
It's not a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? If not, let's move and see if there's any move to exhibit to, not make a motion, around final subdivision. Any questions? Ajay?
Yeah, I have a question on Exhibit 2. Here it is stated, the original thing was that the City Council was the ministerial step that we were looking at, and now we are moving to the hearing examiner being the one. Does that still come back to the City Council after the hearing examiner, or is the examiner the end of the process?
Correct. The examiner is the end of the process.
Okay, so that was, should we spell that out, that the hearing examiner is the end of the process?
I think it reads clearly in the exhibit in the code, and I can take a look and pull it up if needed, but I think it's pretty clear when you're going through the sequence of the code that when you get there, it's done, because it then goes and gets recorded with the county.
Okay, so maybe I did not read that clearly, and I was like, does this still come as a ministerial step to the City Council, or it just ends with the hearing examiner? So maybe I should go back and read that, but...
It says under item G, proposed item G, upon satisfactory review of a proposed final short subdivision, confirming conformance to the conditions of the preliminary short subdivision approval, the department shall approve, oh, excuse me, wrong one, it's H. This is these two steps that we have. We have a short subdivision is done, review and approval and signed by staff, and then it goes to be recorded. And then the other one is H, apologies. Upon satisfactory review of a proposed final subdivision, the department shall transmit a written recommendation to the city hearing examiner. The hearing examiner shall consider the department's recommendation and issue a final written approval decision confirming conformance of the final subdivision to the conditions of preliminary subdivision approval, which is what the examiner does. The examiner issued that, right? So they're the best suited for that. And then there's the last step, which applies both to subdivision and short subdivision that's listed here, is upon issuance of the final subdivision or final short subdivision approval, the accompanying final plat or final short plat document, which is the drawing, the map of the division, shall be recorded with the County Records and Elections Division.
Got it. So then it basically takes out the step of the City Council itself.
That's
because
correct.
It goes straight to the county after the hearing examiner. That's how I'm reading it? Yep. Okay, got it. Thanks.
We would still likely take that to the City Council as a part of the city manager's report and let them know when we are finalizing subdivisions, just so they're aware of it.
But it's not the ministerial step that it used to be.
Right. That's what it would change to
Got
the
it.
hearing
Okay.
examiner.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this change, as far as the final authority of subdivision from moving from city council approval to hearing examiner, the purpose is to expedite the process, right? To make it easier for the applicant to go through the process.
It's to expedite the process, and it's also to remove the illusion of having some form of influence over a largely ceremonial procedure. There's a challenge where members of the community think that the city council at the point of final subdivision can do something different, but in reality, it's largely ceremonial. All the conditions have been met. Under state law, we have a very limited amount of time to take action and approve it. Really where community members need to be involved and engaged is at the preliminary subdivision phase, which is where the hearing examiner holds a hearing and does a comprehensive review of the project and its compliance. So what we're trying to do is to streamline the process, have the hearing examiner do this final review because they're the one that did the preliminary subdivision and are most suited to do it. They're familiar with the project. They wrote the report on the project. They're an independent auditor of the city's work, right? So they're independent from the staff. They're hired directly by the city council, and the staff have a limited relationship with them as an independent hearing authority.
But right now, under the city council as the final authority, they have the right to have public hearing. So the public gets involved no matter which methodology you're using.
That there is no public hearing under the current process.
Even with the city council?
Yeah, it's not a hearing. It simply has to be approved in a public meeting, which is different than a public hearing.
So what is the implication of this change as far as the appeal process? If it is a city council, it can be appealed, right?
To Superior Court.
But if it is hearing examiner, that's the end of line.
To Superior Court.
I think this should be kind of noted. That's something that people should know.
It's the same appeal process, right?
No, if it is a hearing examiner, that's the end of line. You cannot appeal hearing examiner's decision.
You could to Superior Court.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's no different if it was the hearing examiner or the city council approving it. The appeal route is to Superior Court.
Any other comments about the exhibit? We're on 2, right? Yeah, final subdivision. Okay, so let's move to exhibit 3, so height measurement. So this is one that takes the average of the averages kinds of things. And I have no comment on that. Is anybody else? Sure.
I have a comment. I read it and I'm really confused. If you have a piece of land that is basically includes a retaining wall as a part of it because of the grade difference, but a part of the lower part is also has a slope, and then we say that an average, using the average grade, so it's going to be average of the two.
So there's,
I read it a number of
yeah,
times to get-
there's 2 different methods. Previously, there were multiple methods, and what we're trying to do is streamline it down to 2 methods that are simple to measure, and are going to bring down the cost of applicants' background work. Because the way it's currently set up, we're running into situations where builders, homeowners who are building houses, are having to have their surveyors do a lot of mental gymnastics, and it's costing them a lot of money. So what we're proposing is that we simply measure it, if it's a relatively flat lot, flatter than, do you remember what the change? 6 feet, that it simply sets an average existing grade plane by using midpoint of segments, midpoints of walls. So you can see here that if this was a structure and the lot only was mildly sloping, less than 6 feet across the structure, that you would then take each of the walls of the structure and take the midpoint of that wall and where it intersects the existing elevation of the ground, and you would then average that out. And that would give you your average existing grade plane, which is where you would then measure up for the purpose of building height. However, there's another method that I don't think we're proposing to change, right? That is, when it slopes more than 6 feet, you then break it into segments, and then you do individual grade planes for each segment. And the idea there is that we don't really want buildings that are on steep slopes measured across, or not on regulated steep slopes, but grades greater than 6 feet across the foundation. I want to be careful. We're not proposing building homes on steep slopes, because someone will run with that and comment on that. But we want to be careful about how we're measuring the height of homes on sites that have slopes that are greater than that 6 foot limit, because that could result in a negative outcome to a property owner downhill. It could result in a building being taller. What we want them to do is step down the roof line using building segments, and that's what this achieves.
Thank you.
Anything else on height measurement? Okay, let's move to Exhibit 4, fence and rockery height. So this was a 2-foot setback, right?
quickly, there's part 2 to Exhibit 3, which is a little confusing, but it's that sidewall height amendment as well. So I just wanted to pause here to see if anybody had questions about the clarification of when that sidewall height restriction kicks in.
Can you identify what a sidewall is?
Well, that's exactly what this is trying to do, and it's saying that a sidewall and the height limit of 24 feet applies. A sidewall is generally parallel to the side lot line and is located closer than 2 feet to a 5-foot yard setback or 4 feet to a larger setback. So a sidewall is a wall that falls within that zone, and it can only be limited. It can only be 24 feet in height.
So yeah, we beat this one up pretty well at that last meeting. The idea is so that you don't end up with a maximum height of 32 feet, 35 feet right next to a property line, that there's some diminishment or stepping. So you're not looking at a 35-foot wall.
Thank you.
Other comments? All right. Next one is Exhibit 5, State Law Alignment. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, you added. Thanks. It's good to have lots of eyes looking at these things. So, okay, so now we're back. Is there anything on the fence?
I have a question.
Anything on the fence? No pun.
So, if there is a minimum of 2 feet of plantable space for the back of the retaining wall, plantable space for the back of, 2 feet of plantable space for the back of the retaining wall, I see a lot of homes which have a small wall with planting on top of that wall. How does this align with that? So I see some homes where there is a small wall of about 1 to 2 feet, and there's planting done on top of that.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think it's saying kind of the same thing. What this is trying to say is that if you have 6-inch bricks that make up that wall,
yeah,
right, and then there's plantings that happen here,
exactly.
Behind that 6 inches of bricks, there needs to be 2 feet from the bottom of the fence for those two things to be measured independently.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it. Okay. So behind that, 2 feet.
Yep. So from the back point of the wall. So again, 6 inches of bricks. If this is the front and this is the back where the soil is.
Got it.
And there needs to be 2 feet before you get to the base of the fence for those two to be measured independently.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So the back of that.
Of the retaining.
We took 6 inches to do it, but if they did it if somebody did a foot long one as
if it was big boulder rocks,
yeah.
If it was a rockery or berm,
yeah.
Whatever the back point is of that, the back of the boulders, there needs to be 2 additional feet until the base of the fence.
Okay, so for the berm, let's take the berm. That's a perfect example. Then that's 2 feet from the back of the berm to this thing, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. That's great. Thank you.
Does it have to be plantable, or can it just be an empty piece? We're going to make it harder for people to plant it and maintain it, because very fast it's just going to be full of weeds and no one will be able to access it, and fall protection, and someone's going to fall and break their neck. And
No, that's fair. That could be a friendly amendment to this, that it removes the plantable requirement from that. I don't think we would object to that, and it would simplify its application greatly.
That's a great point, right? Because if it's not plantable space, what would we call that? It could be plantable space. It could not be plantable space. It could be plantable today, 5 years from today, 2 bad summers, and it could become a non-plantable one.
It's called DMZ.
Well, yeah, and on the DMZ, it would be possible, I think, in the spirit of this, if I've got rocks that get up to the height for the retaining wall, behind that I have a 2-foot concrete, not even walkway. I mean, it's just concrete because I don't want to plant anything. I don't want to maintain it. And then the fence, nobody's going to see that concrete. It's not going to be an eyesore. It saves the maintenance issue, and it meets the spirit of what I think we're trying to accomplish here, which is the issues around height, right? So that an amendment might make sense around the plantable areas.
So this could be one that we could put in that bucket of amendments, right? So Exhibit 4, Item 4.
Can we just call it a setback and let whoever wants to do whatever decide on their own?
Absolutely, that they could choose to plant it, or they could
Yeah.
choose to
Put
hardscape
pavers
it.
or, yeah.
Put pavers or put some form of art or something there.
Good comments. Okay. State law? All right. It looks like John has a comment.
It felt like we didn't have a lot of discretion on this one. You said that this comment came out in after we'd adopted. If we had not done the ability to open the comp plan for these adjustments, what would have happened? We wouldn't have been able to do anything until next year. Or, I'm just being rhetorical, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll also add that, you know, the comment that we heard during the previous meeting on this was that we should really, you know, not just roll over and do what the state wants us to do on this, and that, you know, there are reasons to add precautionary measures for some of these types of uses that can be impactful to the community. And our analysis is that we have fairly extensive restrictions on permanent supportive housing in the code, and that the separation and occupancy numbers are just some of them. We have operational requirements that are quite extensive and that our legal counsel helped us craft that are just outside the boundary of what are considered legally allowed, or just within the boundary, I guess I should say, of what is considered legally allowed. But the challenge that we have is we have to show that we have capacity for a certain number of these types of units in the city. And when we have a combined limit on 10-person occupancy for PSH, for permanent supportive housing facilities, and a 1-mile radius, it immediately starts to limit where these can go to a point where we cannot meet that capacity requirement. So what we're looking at is retaining the other requirements that we have that ensure the operational components will minimize impacts to the community, but removing the separation requirements or minimizing them down to a 1/4 mile for, is it for both or for just emergency? For both, right. So we still have a separation requirement, but it's just been reduced to something that allows us to be sure we have the capacity to meet state law.
First of all, David or Evans, the 1/2 mile or 1/4 mile, is that a radius or a linear distance? I can look at the statements. I can basically say that when you say walking distance, that's linear.
Yeah, it's from a boundary of the parcel. So a 1/4 mile measured as a radius from the boundary of the parcel. So you take the property lines and then measure a half or a quarter. Sorry, I keep saying 1/2 mile, 1/4 mile out from every point of the boundary line to create a boundary.
But then when you say walking distance, which means...
Oh, I see. Yeah, you know, I'm glad you brought that up because I realized I didn't mention that in the presentation. That was another one of those restrictions that we're striking because it would limit where these facilities could be sited, because not every one of our bonus parcels is located where next to a transit stop.
Exactly, that's why I wanted.
Yeah, so it's struck from, that is one that we've also removed. And I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention in the presentation. So that walking distance one is struck, and we recommend.
Because right now we have only, 228 Holly Way, that's the only transit corridor. And the rest of the city, we don't have any bus stops, so this requirement doesn't apply to it.
So we let me go ahead and share screen here. I apologize, but I'm going to jump in here, Evan.
While he's pulling, he raised an important question about it being whether it's linear or the radius.
Can you stop sharing?
And if the city, if Sound Transit puts another bus stop somewhere, does that change the?
If you look at linear, totally different story than if you look at radius.
So
Well, again, we're just striking that requirement that it must be within a half-mile walking distance, whether it's as the
it's
crow
linear
flies
or
or
radius,
radius,
it's just taking
it's
it off.
gone.
It's
Yep.
item 5 here, and you can see we've changed it so that it says facilities should be located within walking distance of a bus transit stop when feasible. And in part, this is because we have a changing dynamic up here around transit service and bus stops, and it's really hard for us to model out exactly where these would be feasible for our capacity right now. I'd love to say that we have lots of spaces available because of a very robust transit system and lots of stops, but that is simply not the truth right now. We have a shortage of meaningful transit. We're hearing that those numbers are going to increase with the opening of the Mary Moore Station, and we're going to start to see some additional transit frequency from the Sound Transit presentation at one of the recent council meetings. It's a good thing to watch. It's an update from Sound Transit, but we feel that this is a good place for us to land, and that can help us influence where these go when we're working with social service providers who might want to put in an emergency housing facility in the city. Although I, again, have to say, we did say this at the last meeting, we have been working with the county and following very closely on their efforts to develop emergency and transitional housing facilities. And they have told us plainly that it simply does not pencil for them to locate an emergency housing facility or transitional housing facility in the city of Sammamish, and they do not see that happening anytime in the near or relative distant future, simply because of the cost dynamics that go along with it.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that you changed shall to should, because that makes it really clear, and I really appreciate that you added when feasible, because that also changes a number of things. But I'm now worried that we took away the 1.5 mile walking distance into just walking distance, because that makes it very, very subjective. My walking distance could be very different from somebody else's walking distance, right? So why should we remove the 1.5 mile?
Friendly amendment could be to add it back in. I don't think we'd have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only reason is because this kept it really specific and kept it very to the point of that 1.5 mile. And if you take that off, it makes it very, very open and murky. So I'm totally fine with the remaining 2 that you added, but just the 1.5 mile, if you could bring it back.
Yep, yeah, I'm fine with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anything else on the state law alignment? And we have a possible amendment on that one. Okay, so now affordable housing. And I know there was a lot of discussion in May on that one, so I suspect there'll be some questions for this, and we'll have some discussion after public hearing. So, Sean, you want to go first? I read your mind.
I'll go first. And I know that this topic, we discussed it at least twice from before, so it's not news to you. I completely object to this. And I completely disagree with any form of penalty or a tax to any citizen, any private citizen who is building a house for themselves. And like I said in the past, I know it will get me into the argument of how do we know that she or he is building it for themselves? I trust them. I deal with honest people, and I trust our neighbors and fellow Sammamish residents that they're all honest people, and they say they're building it for their families, they are. Will there never be someone who will abuse it? Absolutely not. One of these days, there will be one who will abuse it. But I'm not going to penalize the majority just because of the one or two that will abuse it. Adding a 10% tax, that's a big burden to someone who is limited on budget. People, they build them by themselves. And when we add a 10% penalty on that, it's just unfair. And also limiting it to 1,500 square feet, I think we're not doing anyone any good. If I go today, I mean, not me, my kids are grown up. But if, like the guy who is back there, if he's building a new house and he's starting a family, 1,500 square feet, he will run out of space very fast. Once his kids, they start growing up, they become teenagers, you need a larger space. Anyone who's my age knows what I'm talking about. 1,500 square feet are not enough. If we have to put a limit, and again, I'm opposed to putting any limits. It's my property, it's my money, I earned it legally, I do whatever I want to do. But if we have to put a limit, I would go with at least 3,000 square feet, not 1,500. I might come back, but I'll let someone else take it.
That's a good start. Who's next? Why don't we go around?
I tend to agree with Hisham's position, but it's going to be a jump from 1,500 to the 3,000. I think that 3,000 maybe is a too high an exemption, and it probably would meet you somewhere close to 2,000 or so, or 2,200. Let me give an example. I bought a house in Sahali. When we bought a house, it was 2,200. We had 4 children grown into it, and it was fine. 2,200 fits us very well. We have enough room. We had, of course, all of the kids are out on their own, but 3,000 is shown. That is too much of exemption. I'd probably go with it, either 2,000 or 2,200. But I agree with Hisham's position. 1,500 doesn't go anywhere as far as making exemptions.
Ajay?
Yeah, I thought we beat this thing black and blue, but then the more I read about it, the more I change. I think that 1,500 doesn't seem to be a number that can be supportable as we go for it. I live in a 2,000 square feet home, and I'm looking to change it after, and my son is grown up now, but still, with all that, I'm still thinking about it. So even if I put myself to it, this seems to be something that I would not like and not support. And I agree with Hisham. There are going to be people who are going to abuse it, but to base it on the exception case rather than on the normal case is a little too far. It's a bridge too far for me at this point in time. So I've come to be a believer into saying that let's remove that exception.
John, do you have a?
Can we get a little bit more clarification on your position? You said.
I might just jump in real quick to clarify that this is great conversation, but it's perfect time for the deliberation portion after the public hearing. Right now, just if you have questions for us about what's written, that would be great, and then save this for deliberation. Y'all can go ahead.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
No, I don't have a question on this one.
Any clarifying? I have a clarifying question. So I was looking at the exemptions, and I think this gets a little bit to these comments without debating exact wording, but the reason I would assume that there is not an exemption for me building on my property is because we'd like to get that fee in lieu to go into the pot, right? To add to the potential for affordable housing. Is that because there's no, the list of exemptions, it's a unit size, it's an internal subdivision of existing structure, garage conversions, rebuild, that kind of thing. It's not property owned by an individual who's building their house. And so the reason for keeping that out is to include those single-family homes being built as part of the potential for funding for the affordable housing, whatever it's called, slush fund. I guess it's not a slush fund, but, or to really encourage the owner to make a small affordable house. Okay, so we'll need to debate that purpose and if that's an appropriate purpose.
If I could add to that, I think, part of it also is trying to get the owner to consider creating forward-compatible designs that could accommodate different life statuses over the life cycle of the structure. One of the things that we have heard a lot about in our visioning and our comp plan work is that people don't have a place to go. They're in this big house. Their kids have moved out. But if that house had been built, and it's a good question about what is the city's role, what is government's role, right? And I'm not arguing either way with this. I'm presenting the question. Is that on the one hand, if the requirements for building that new home when it was built had required that it be built as a primary unit with 2 accessory dwelling units built into it, and it was then ready to go, that the homeowner could rent out 2 of the units and live in the primary unit, or live in one of the subordinate units and rent out the other 2 units, that addresses that comment largely, that someone now has an income stream, that the space is being used efficiently, it presents other living opportunities. So there's that benefit, right? And part of it is that the way the building industry is currently operating is on maximum square foot, maximum values, and maximum returns. And unless there is some interruption in that the building industry will not automatically start to build those types of units on its own. That is not my argument. That is the argument that I have heard presented in favor of this type of regulation. On the flip side, we have individual people who have saved all their money for years, who've bought a property or wanting to build a home, and have budgeted a certain amount, which is already an enormous amount of money to build a home, and now are presented with this additional fee to build the home that they want to live in. So there's that side of the argument too. We're in the policy realm here. We're really trying to find solutions to problems and not create new problems by presenting solutions. However, this is a very challenging topic that the entire region is facing. And many cities are moving to positions where they are trying to influence and interrupt the industry a little bit to try to get builders to build homes that are smaller, homes that are more flexible in their spaces and forward compatible with different future life cycle needs. And this is one of the tools in the toolbox to get there.
Okay. We probably should move to Exhibit 7, and then we'll move to the public hearing. So any comments, questions for clarification on removing lot coverage, Exhibit 7? So this is primarily language changes, right? I didn't have any. Anybody else? Okay. So now that we've had a little bit of clarification, we'll move to the public hearing. So I'll open the public hearing. Public hearing comments, 3 minutes. Who'd like to go first? I'll go first again. Thank you, Mr. Eastman.
James Eastman, East Sammamish Parkway. So I'm not here to say I told you so with development regs phase 2, but I think there are some unintended consequences. We're not using land efficiently anymore. And that's a fact. Just go look at every permit that has occurred since then. So I'm afraid the same thing might happen with this code. Here's why. House Bill 1110 created triple the amount of density for a landowner. And Sammamish is saying, well, there's value in additional density, so this gives us the right to charge a fee to that landowner for the density we created. What we talked about earlier is Bright O'Neill has a density of 17. They're only using 10. It doesn't matter how much density you create. They're not going to go above 10. Like, the market doesn't allow it. I don't think it's because Bright O'Neill's an idiot or all these developers are idiots, the last 6 that have gone through, and they're walking away from all this money. I mean, we characterize developers as greedy. What are they seeing that we're not seeing? So the state law says that if you're going to charge someone a fee, it's got to be commensurate with a benefit. So we're claiming there's all this benefit to being able to build more, so we're going to charge you this fee. But the last 6 or 7 permits that have come through here, there's a glass ceiling that's stopping them from utilizing the density that's already available to them today. So to go from 17 to 68, like, no, they're going to stay at 10. If we don't change those reasons that are keeping them at 10, it doesn't matter what happens. So what's keeping them at 10? Tree retention, no mass clearing and grading, stormwater, critical areas. I went back to look at this plat, and it has 4 Class 3 wetlands, 2 on-site, 2 off-site. And I thought, oh, if I had to rebuild it, how would I do it? I went and looked at the wetland code, and in the hearing packet, it says City Council is not going to change wetland code either as the Planning Commission. Well, then I went to look at the Class 3 wetland buffers. With a Category 8, it went from 75 to 300. We quadrupled our wetland buffers in the critical codes area for a Class 3 wetland. That was news to me. I mean, holy cow. So that affects it. So if I'm the landowner there and I say, well, now I got this off-site wetland that somebody recorded with a wildlife rating of an 8, and it has a 300-foot radius onto my property, and I can't even go look at it to verify it, like, I'm not going to sit there and wait and try to do that and then go to the public hearing with our hearing examiner, who is so thorough that oftentimes when you go to him, he'll find something that neither the city or the applicant even bring and reject it, and adds years to the process. It's like, heck no, I'm not going through that whole process of a subdivision for middle housing, and I'm going to pay this fee on top of that? Like, no, I'm just going to build like even a bigger house and less of them, and even be less efficient with my land. And that's probably what this code's going to do, because of the faulty basis that we're creating all this extra value when everything we built in the last 6 years says, no, there's no value there. There's a cap, and we've done nothing to remove that cap or take off the changes we implemented in 2019 to encourage middle housing. I want to do middle housing. I think it'd be great. But all the data that I'm looking through, it's like, what do these guys know that I don't? Are they all idiots? I'm not so sure that they are. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Eastman. Who's next?
Hello, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Appreciate clearing up the difference between net and gross. I've been in real estate a long time, so I know the difference in those measurements. It's nice to have that clear. One thing I didn't hear about is, and you don't have to answer me, but I'm going to ask anyway, what in your code is a unconditioned garage? Just an interesting term, and even I haven't heard that one. And then something that I can't recall, so I'm going to ask about it. Are ADUs and DADUs regardless of, or no, they have a size limit, so they'd be under 1,500 feet, so there wouldn't be any affordable fee for any ADU, I think, if we look at it that way. Okay, all right. Then I'll skip my comments on the net versus gross. I agree that, in my opinion, as I've said at least a couple times over the last couple years, is most regulation that affects land ultimately boils down to the landowner, as was stated here this evening. So it typically isn't a builder that pays it. They, on average, keep their margins the same. So it does come down to a cost to the owner of the land. Now, some would argue that the land value's gone up somewhat. In some cases, that's true too, but still, I think it's just a good thing to know that that's the ultimate payer of things. Not to add issues to the discussion, because there is a lot of potential policy decisions in all this. There's a lot of it. But it is an interesting question that was raised by several people here. Let's say that there's a Plateau Estates lot, which are good-sized lots and houses are 1,500 to 2,000 feet. If somebody buys that to build for themselves, they could either add on or tear that house down and build a 4,000-foot house and not pay any fee according to this. What if a builder does that? What if the builders come in and do spot lots, it's called, in the industry, and buy that same property? Then do they pay on the 4,000 feet? What if the builder partners with that owner? There's just interesting questions. And on the garage issue, what if somebody builds a couple of cool unconditioned garages and a year or two later converts them into units over 1,500 feet? There's just a lot of what ifs here. And I guess my point is on this, and I won't go too much over in just a second, maybe there should be a built-in placeholder in this to take a pretty hard look at all of it after a year and see if there's any changes that need to be made based on actual applications and lessons learned with all these different things that are in play. All right, appreciate the chance to speak. Thank you.
And thank you. Next person? Anybody? Y'all okay? We've heard you, your points are very clear earlier. Anybody online?
No hands raised.
Okay. All right. So hearing no more comments, we'll close the public hearing and begin our debate. And I guess the most expedient way to do this is I'm just going to go through and kind of get like nods if there's any change that we need to discuss about each of the exhibits. And if not, then we'll kind of group those together, we'll make a motion and move those along. So any change to Exhibit 1 about definitions? We talked a little bit about trees, shrubs. You know, is that important enough to make a change, given how that's used?
You said 1?
Well, no, I think we can just leave that up to staff.
You said number 1?
Yeah, just Exhibit 1, if we should make any. Okay, so that'll be one that we will make a motion to move along. The final subdivision, so this is with the hearing examiner. Any debate that we need to do further about that? Cool. We're down 2. We're on a roll. Maybe I shouldn't speak, but the next one was about the height measurement. Anything else? All right, 3. All right, number 4. This was fence and rockery, and my notes included that we might want to change that plantable area. So is that something that we want to have a little quick discussion on? All right, we'll move that to a motion, then amendment. Hopefully be pretty straightforward. Okay, state law alignment. So this is that quarter mile. So those changes? Any further?
There was an amendment that you brought it up that you wanted to.
This was a walkable, maybe?
Changing the word to include the quarter mile.
The half mile of walkable distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to add that
That's an
back in,
amendment.
so that would be, I think, an amendment.
Is
you
that,
like, we'll
is that
do
an
that.
amendment?
Fairly straightforward if we
Yeah.
wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do that as a motion with amendment for that change. Okay, I know we're going to have some conversations about affordable housing, so we will, I won't even ask that question. And then the removing lot coverage, so Exhibit 7. Anything else on that one? All right. So by my tally, we've got Exhibits 1, 2, 3, and 7 that.
No, that's 6 is the
Oh,
one
that's
that
6
we
is affordable housing.
Yeah,
So we're going to have a conversation
yeah,
about that.
we're going to have a conversation on 6.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to accept those exhibits and recommend those exhibits to City Council.
So moved.
Seconded.
Somebody should make that motion. I was suggesting that somebody make the motion.
Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 7, right? Yeah, I'd like to make the motion to move to City Council on number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 7.
Okay?
Second.
And second from Syed. Okay, so any further discussion? Any discussion? All right, so all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None. So that motion passes. Okay, so next, Exhibit 4. This was the fence and rockery height. So to do this appropriately, we would make a motion to accept, and then somebody else a motion to amend. And then we would vote on the amended motion. So first step would be the motion to accept.
So moved.
Or so made.
Second.
Okay. So, and is there any discussion? And for this, I think there would be the discussion about the setback, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so before we vote, we'll have that brief discussion, make a motion if we decide to include the wording change. Does that make sense? You following? Okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
But Sean, you made the changes.
Okay, I propose to make a change instead of plantable, instead of 2 feet plantable area, to just call it a 2-foot setback.
Okay? And any second for that?
I second it.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second for that amendment. Any discussion on the amendment?
Just a question to staff. Do you need any clarification on what that might consist of? Or is it clear that it's from the back of the rockery or the back of the, okay.
Yeah, that part would still be retained, I think, so, from the back of the retaining wall rockery, so.
Yeah, it really
Okay.
is just changing the wording around the plantable
Yep.
to,
Yep.
yeah.
And the staff, would that, if we leave it alone, would that possibly create a problem of people using it as storing junk and everything else? Should we make it a little bit clear, maybe concrete surface or something, kind of eliminate that anxiety, abuse of that space?
Could say 2 foot of maintained setback from the back of the retaining wall. That might allow us then to do some form of code enforcement
I'd
if
maintain,
there's
yeah.
something.
I like that. Yeah.
So we'll change the wording on that motion. So move to change to maintained setback. Yeah, okay. Any further discussion? Okay, so first we'll do all in favor of the motion to amend. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that amendment is passed. And now the motion with the amendment to move that Exhibit 4, recommend Exhibit 4 to council. And so we had made that motion, so no further discussion?
With the amendment.
Yes, so now we're voting on that initial motion with the amended
Yeah, with the
motion that we've
amendment,
just
right?
passed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No opposed. Okay. So we'll move 4 along. Now, Number 5, that was the state law alignment. So we're on a roll now, so motion to move it forward. Somebody should make that.
With your amendment?
Yeah,
With your
And then we'll do the
amendment, right?
adjustment, the amendment to that.
Yeah.
So,
so just to be clear, with the amendment of,
following
Adding-
Robert's rules, we
adding a
should
quarter.
move first to accept this Exhibit 5 as presented. And then under discussion, we say, no, we'd like to make an amendment. And we'll make a motion on the amendment, pass the amendment, then pass the amended motion.
okay,
So,
okay.
yeah, Robert's rule, let's just say, make that change.
Well, I move that we recommend Exhibit 5, state law amendment as drafted to the city council.
Okay?
Second?
And any discussion? Anybody would like to make a change to the wording of that exhibit?
Yeah, that's the change that I'd like to make.
The half mile,
The half mile, the addition of,
To be reduced.
Okay, so we'll have a motion to change. Okay, so,
add back the 1/2 mile.
perfect, yeah.
I thought
Sorry,
that was a quarter.
were you going to do that? I don't know who's controlling. So it looks like it was going to be added back.
Oh, I was just highlighting the thing we're talking about, but now it'll be up to one of you to make that amendment,
Yeah,
make that
so,
motion.
and then just to further clarify, so what will happen is that we will, Mark and I'll sign a letter that goes to council with the things that we've agreed to. And so, I think what we've done in the past is they'll make maybe some very minor changes so that we've got, this is item 5 of whatever 20.04. Whatever other numbers are in there, right? So, okay. So that will, we will not delete the 1/2 mile is what we're talking about.
Correct, yep.
Yeah.
We're following,
But your
we're following the
recommendation was
amendment, so.
reducing from half a mile to quarter mile.
No. My recommendation was that whatever it is, that we just add that quantitative value of whether it's.
Quantitative, the value of the staff was a quarter, reduced.
But they're two
from
different
half to quarter.
things. So the half mile that Ajay was referring to was within a walking distance from a facility to a transit stop, and that when feasible, facilities should be placed within 1/2 mile walking distance. The quarter mile is a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, my thing is that the 1/2 mile be added in there, which is why when you highlighted it, I thought you were going to do that change. right?
Oh, yeah. I'll do it on the flip side, and when the council sees it, they'll see the amended and updated version, so.
On the flip side,
On the flip
for
side.
1/2
right.
mile.
When they see it. So we should vote on that change to not to delete the 1/2 mile
Yeah,
walking distance. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? So that amendment passes, and now we can vote on the original motion as amended to recommend to council the modifications, the changes to the code that are shown in Exhibit 5.
So moved.
Seconded.
Yeah, we've done that. And so now we'll take the vote on that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that passes. All right, now, affordable housing.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to have some discussion, but we should make a motion to move this along, and then we'll discuss amendments. So, somebody to make a motion.
I move that we recommend Exhibit 6, affordable housing, to the city council as presented by staff.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion?
I'll try to be short this time. So I make recommendations to remove completely the 10% penalty, tax, whatever we want to call it, on private citizens building for themselves. I make another recommendation to remove the 1,500 square foot limit, and if we have to set a limit, to be at least 3,000 square feet. A 1,500 square foot is not useful for any single family over 30 years or 20 years. And if the goal is to encourage people to move here and to stay here, 1,500 square feet, people will run out of space very fast. I grew up in probably 1,000 square foot, but that was 50 years ago, or longer than that. In today's world, we know society needs more than 1,500 square feet. And to try to proof it for the future, for all those who will come after us and after the ones after us, I think it's unfair to the one who's paying the bill today. And again, that's just me here talking. I'm building it for what suits my family. It's not for those who are going to come after us. It's a very sensitive subject, and I don't want to be cruel or mean, but at the same time, I care more about the people who live here today than the people who will move here in the future. There are better ways to provide affordable housing, in my opinion, and in my opinion, we're just making building homes more expensive. We are doing the complete opposite to what we are intending to do.
Hey, let me add, just to clarify, I understand the point you're making overall, and you're referring to this across the whole affordable housing, because as I understand it, there's portions of this that are really targeted, I think, in intent to builders and subdivisions and so forth. And it also kind of pulls in, if you will, the individual property owner, like the speaker earlier. Yeah. And in my mind, those are sort of potentially two different scenarios that might be handled differently. So just to clarify in terms of where you're coming from, do you take that for both of those scenarios or the individuals?
I honestly take it for both,
Okay.
but I'm more concerned about the individuals.
Makes sense. Okay.
The price of the new homes sets the price of the existing homes. If the builders today increase the cost or the price of buying a new house, realtors will increase the price of existing homes. So I cannot pretend that one will not affect the other. It's one market. Yeah. And nowadays, people are going through enough, from tariffs to tax on utilities to a lot of different things. We cannot just add more. I mean, none of us, our paychecks are increased every year by the increases that are in the market. And it's just not right for us to charge someone an additional 10%. And I don't want to say because we want to make housing affordable to someone else. The way we're trying to make it affordable to that someone else will not work this way. And again, we talked about this in the past. It's just not going to work that way. We need to think about it differently. We need to build apartments that are subsidized, and we need to come up with someone who will subsidize that cost. But thinking that single-family homes in an area like this, taking 10% from people will make them affordable, it won't. And it's not something I like, but this is the reality. This is what we live in. And I wish if there's a way for me to just dial it back to make it affordable across the board. And I keep going back to the people that I truly want to see them living where they work. Nurses, school teachers, firefighters, police officers. I want to see them living where they work. I don't want to see them driving 1 hour. But this is not going to make it affordable.
Okay. So why don't we go around? And I'll go last. I've got a couple of comments, too.
I have two questions, staff, David and Evan. How common is this right now? How often you come across something like this as somebody? How many units or how many applications per year you come across? People wanted to add to the existing square footage, rebuilding it.
So for someone doing a, excuse me, a home renovation project where they're also doing an addition. So I think we're currently exempt, that's currently exempt under the current.
Totally exempt.
That's
They don't have to
exempt, right. So if you're doing a home addition, it's not, you're not currently put in the category of being, the inclusionary affordable housing fee does not apply.
Question number 2, what happens if I have a existing home and I want to remodel, but then part of remodel may be in the form of ADUs? Would that exemption apply?
Well, the ADUs would be smaller than 1,000 square feet, so just by simple restriction on ADU size, so then it would apply.
It would apply.
It would not apply to the ADUs.
And then if this exemption goes through with the way that you're proposing right now, how would that affect the ADUs?
It would, they still wouldn't apply because it would be raising it from 1,000 square feet to 1,500 square feet or higher if the commission recommends that.
So let's say hypothetically, the existing square footage is 1,000, and I'm adding a ADU of 500. So am I exempt?
You would be exempt. You would be exempt up to 1,000 square
So
feet. You would be exempt.
You look at the combination between rebuilding and/or ADUs as long as the total square footage stays the same.
I would say if you were doing in addition to your home and you were building a detached accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, say, that was 1,000 square feet, you would be exempt under the way it's written today.
What happens if I include that as a one package? I don't call it.
You'd still be
separate
exempt.
ADUs. So ADUs could be a part of it as long as it meets the minimum square footage requirement.
Yeah, there's basically 4 ways you could develop your property that apply the inclusionary affordable housing requirement differently, right? There's currently, if you have an existing home and you renovate that home and you carve out units within the home, if you add square footage to the home, you're exempt. And that stems from a policy that it's passed down from the state, it comes down through King County, it comes down to the city of trying to preserve existing housing stock. That is really one of the region's goals, is to retain existing housing stock. So trying to provide that exception for those categories is important in order to achieve that objective. Various reasons for that. The next category is if you were taking a vacant lot and building it traditionally with one new single-family home, and that new single-family home was larger than 1,000 square feet under today's rules, then you would be subjected to the inclusionary affordable housing in lieu fee, which is $34.45 per square foot, that is measured on the total square footage of the home. Trying to clarify whether that includes a garage or not. It really, that's what we're trying to do here. Then the next way you could build out your home, your property, would be to build a new single-family home and up to 2 ADUs, attached or detached, right? So in that scenario, you could build, say, a 2,000 square foot home with 2,000 square foot attached ADUs, and you'd be, did I say 2,000 square foot home with 2 attached ADUs, and you'd be building a 4,000 square foot structure. So that would give you 4,000 square feet of space. You would be subject to the inclusionary affordable housing fee on 2,000 square feet, because that is not exempt under the 1,000 square foot exemption. If you were to raise that exemption to 2,000 square feet, then you could build that development without paying the in lieu fee at all. If you were to raise it to, say, 3,000 square feet, then you could build a 3,000 square foot home and 2,000 square foot ADUs for a total of 5,000 square feet, and you would not be required to pay the fee. You can see how those configurations, what that's trying to promote is some diversity in how homes are designed. That's really what it's intending to do, is it's trying to drive builders and designers towards providing different types of square footage and space in order to escape the in lieu fee that might be applied, right? Then the next category is if you were subdividing your property. Let's say, or how about this? Let's say you're building middle housing. So you have an existing vacant lot. You are allowed to build middle housing, 0.5 FAR for 1 unit, 0.65 for 2, 0.8 for 3 units. Let's say you had a 10,000 square foot lot in the R4 and you wanted to, that was vacant, and you wanted to build a triplex, which you're allowed to do under Sammamish rules. You get a building permit and build a triplex. You could build up to 8,000 square foot of space if you followed the 3,000 square foot footprint and you went up to the 35-foot height limit, and your lot was fairly, let's take out other restrictions that might apply, which are complicate things, but generally you could easily achieve an 8,000 square foot building. So you basically would then have a triplex that maybe is a combination of a triplex that is a total of 8,000 square feet of volume in that building, that could include 2 3,000 square foot units and 1 2,000 square foot unit. In that case, you'd be paying the fee in lieu on all of the units under today's rule, but if you were to change the exemption to 2,000, you'd only be paying it on 6,000. If you were to change the exemption to 3,000, you would not be paying it at all. You can start to see how that exemption really drives the type of product that is now being built. But it's important to note that the middle housing rule would allow you to do that in the first place, which was not on the books in the city's code prior to the passage of these additional regulations. Now, some might argue that there are other restrictions in place that are going to preclude it or diminish it. I'd argue that those have been in place before we even went through development regs phase 1. That those stormwater rules that we have been aggressive since before that time. The critical areas rules we've had have been aggressive. Tree protection was in place before that. So a lot of what you heard tonight in one of the comment, I disagree with largely, and I think that it's a bit being sensationalized for make a point, but I think that you could easily achieve on a R4 10,000 square foot lot an 8,000 square foot building volume in the form of a triplex.
But again, these are kind of hypothetical situations. This is not what Ishan was talking about or the gentleman was talking about. It's existing home. It's not a virgin land. So
right.
Existing home, the person or the homeowner wants to basically keep the existing property, keep the existing structure, but also add more square footage to that. So
it would be exempt.
that is relatively, well, depends on what is the exemption. Is that 1,500 or what Ishan?
Well, no, it just exempts, that's a new unit. If you're not building another unit, it would be exempt. So the way it's written today, all new residential projects are subject to the fee. Existing residential, existing additions, so say you had a modest 1,500 square foot home, which, believe it or not, there are some of those around, and you wanted to add 1,000 square feet to it, you would not be subject to the fee.
But how about this proposed change?
It doesn't change that.
Then I'm confused. Then what is?
Wait a second.
So I think I can explain, because you weren't at the last meeting. So the previous proposal was for a new structure, 1,000 feet or less, 1,000 square feet or less, would be exempt from the fee in lieu. And we recommended changing that from 1,000 square feet to 1,500 square feet at the last meeting. And so that's the new construction that David's talking about. Is that it? That's accurate?
New units that are
units, yeah.
smaller than, it would go up from 1,000 to 1,500, or possibly higher if the commission recommends it.
And that is the one that you're talking about, increasing to 3,000.
Yeah, I refused to vote to that the last time.
I was not in.
Yeah, you were not here, but I refused to vote, yes. I voted no. Another thing, it's the unintended consequences. This 10%, you just raised the property tax for everyone in Sammamish by 10%. I would love to see the price of my house continues going up. Some people, it makes them feel good. It makes me feel bad because I know that my property tax will go up. And it means we just taxed a lot of people out of their homes. There are a lot of people that they still live here, that they retired. They have limited income. They cannot afford that additional 10% on top of what the market is already doing to them.
Yeah, so let's go to Commissioner Hisham's point. That's true. I voted, and then now I'm really thinking, given all the changes that are coming, economic changes that are coming, and all the work that's going on, does this increase that's 10% for everyone, right?
It's 10%, so it's not 10% of property value. It is, the requirement is that all new units in the city require 10% of the units being built are built at 80% area median income. Now, the easiest way to understand this, and this has been modeled and was presented to the city council as part of the fee setting process back in January, January, yeah, of this year. And for anyone watching, all of those meetings are linked and time-stamped on our website, on the Affordable Housing website page, within our page, and you can watch all the city council meetings on this topic. And before I answer that question, I want to pull back just a little bit here, because I think it's important to keep in mind there's sort of the first question is, and this is the one the council has provided direction on by way of policy in the comprehensive plan, is the premise. And the question is a premise. Are we going to require a citywide inclusionary affordable housing program? The answer to that has been provided by the council. The answer is yes, unless they change the comp plan and change the code to remove that. So moving on, assuming that premise has been answered, moving to the next question is where and how should it apply? And under that, there really are two primary things that you want to ask or answer. Is one is what are the exemptions, like where doesn't it apply? And that's what we're talking about here is, existing, should we add existing, or should we add individual property owners and builders, who are building a home for themselves to the list? I think that's one proposal that has been thrown out there. Another is how big of a home should be exempt from the fee? And that's the 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 question. And then there are other exemptions that could apply. And we have, I think, a decent list there. Units being rebuilt, garage conversions, these are all exemptions, right? For things that should not be, where it should not be applied. There are others where you have ideas that should be added in. I think, this is the time to make that recommendation. The other, I want to say, lever or dial that's out there that the council has considered is if you're building a fractional unit of less than, so if say you're doing less than 10 units and you end up with a fractional unit, say a four unit, say a three pack triplex, and you had to pay the fee. Well, how much should the fee be is the question. And the council made it clear that they were starting with a $34.45 per square foot fee. That was what was recommended, that came from a model that was delivered by Arch, based on a duplex construction in the city compared to an 80% AMI sale versus a market sale. And the difference, if I may get this wrong, so don't quote me on the numbers, but the market sale price was 1.2 million and the 80% AMI price was 400,000. So there's about an $800,000 differential between the market price and the 80% AMI price. And the way the in lieu fee is designed is to largely distribute that across fractional unit increments. So if you were to do, it doesn't always add up exactly, so we're not going to say that it does, but it's a pretty close conclusion if you were to do 10 units at a certain amount of square footage, a market square footage of what an anticipated townhome would be, versus building one 80% AMI unit and taking an $800,000 loss, if you will. I'm just trying to say it how it is. So that's where that math comes from. The council did consider under the fee whether or not there should be the concept of a market factor or a catalyst applied, which would modify the fee and turn the dial down. So 3445 is what the math is saying is where the inclusionary affordable in lieu fee should be based on that model. Well, is that right for the city from a policy perspective, or should we turn the dial back and apply a market factor because we don't want to stall new home starts or new home construction, or we don't want to cause an inappropriate burden on builders who are trying to build homes or individuals who are trying to build homes? And they had a very serious conversation about that. And they identified that they would start at 3445, and they directed staff to come back and report out on trends that we're seeing. And we have to do that anyway for the State Department of Commerce, so we're going to be doing that also with the council. And the council would then revisit and reconsider the in lieu fee at a later date and determine whether a catalyst or a market adjustment should be, a market factor should be applied to the fee. So the council started in a precautionary tone with a certain amount, understanding that this could impact building in the city. But at the same time, we also are in the middle of a bit of a housing crisis, trying to find a way to provide housing. And I understand there's different perspectives on how that is achieved. But that is, I wanted to make sure you understood the other side to this, that there is that other dial or lever that's available to the council should they choose to, if we were to make these changes and say we landed on 2,200 square feet of exemption for a new unit, and say we landed on exempting individual property owners that are building their own home, and that was a recommendation. In those instances where it would still apply to a production builder or to somebody who is building a development that doesn't fit within these exemptions, there still is that down the line continued monitoring where the council would have that opportunity to turn the dial back and reduce the fee. Say they landed at, maybe they come back at $10 a square foot, and that's their way to try and make that adjustment to respond to other economic factors, other drivers that are out there related to housing starts. That was a lot, I'm sorry, but I wanted to try and explain that other parameter that is constantly under consideration by the council.
We should extend the meeting.
Yeah, I would propose.
30 minutes, maybe.
I would amend. Sorry. I would propose extending the meeting by 30 minutes.
To 9 o'clock.
Second.
Okay, all in favor extending to 9?
Aye.
Aye.
David, there were some very helpful comments there. And one is, it's helpful to remind us that we've actually been directed by council, and it's written in code to have this affordable housing, right? I forget what the exact title is for this section, but mandatory affordable housing. So our focus really is on the modifications, right? And just like you mentioned, there's a few things that we have some potential levers on if we choose, and it's the size of the exemption, individual property owners, those sorts of things. So we need to focus our discussions on that, and recognize that the text says this is one method for providing affordable housing. It's frankly, in my opinion, a very blunt force. And does have some unintended consequences to potentially increase the prices of houses and make, in general, less affordable. And I have seen or heard discussions, I may have this mixed up, it was relatively recently, that either Seattle or King County was looking at a significant bond, like $1 billion bond levy to substantially change the game and being able to help pay for affordable housing. And that just brings it all to the surface. Voters will say, we want affordable housing, we're going to support this levy, as opposed to numbers that basically kind of get hidden. So that's philosophical, and I felt like saying that so council could hear and understand that these are the things that we're wrestling with after hearing lots of feedback from the community. Having said that, I think we do need to focus on the things that we can recommend for changes. John, we haven't heard from you. Is there some additional comments you need? And then we'll start to tie this together and wrap it up.
Okay. Incredibly complicated. First, I'll say the city doesn't build houses. That's been drummed into us. So there's limited mechanisms to meet the state's requirements for providing the housing types that were put upon us. You know, in the middle housing unit lot development, that gives a mechanism. But still, the requirements, and we've seen the analysis from Arch about how it can work with either apartments or single-family developments, townhouses, whatever, where the developer is willing to set aside 10%. So it kind of boils down to, I think, Kevin, if you could put the slide back up that we're talking about, where those boundaries are around the exceptions. Because I think the council's already set in policy the 10%, give or take. So we're kind of nibbling around the edges, particularly since, 75–80% of our development is subdivisions built by, obviously, developers. So what's the reasonable size to start an exemption? We already know that ADUs are exempt, that additions are exempt, a rebuild as a result of a natural disaster is exempt. And I think David alluded to even more. So coming at this from exactly the opposite direction as Sham is where do we set that lower limit? And we talked about this extensively at our last meeting and raised it from 1,000 to 1,500, some of it based on feedback from master builders or developers. So for the developer, it seemed they're in step with the 10% and paying the in lieu fee if they need to. So it comes back to a very narrow, kind of small bucket. And perhaps a compromise would be for an owner-builder, and again, we've got all sorts of issues around how you define that the first 1,500 square feet of that new house is exempt. But if they want 3,000, then they're going to pay the in lieu fee on that 1,500 above and beyond the 1,500. So gives some relief, but also, and some incentive, but also recognizes that we're in a tight spot. We need moderate and low-income housing, and we don't have very good tools to get there. So that would be my proposal.
Can I comment on that?
Absolutely.
The ARCH model, because all what we're talking about here, it's the ARCH model. It's nothing. It has nothing to do with the state requirement. The state requirement to provide affordable housing, we already approved that in the comprehensive plan. The middle housing, we already approved that in the comprehensive plan. And I believe that the middle housing will provide affordable housing because it's the right size and it will provide affordable housing. The ARCH model is designed for cities different than Sammamish. It's designed for cities where houses are not priced in an insane way like they are in Sammamish. And that's why I keep going back to that. This model will not work here. I think 15 exempt and 15 not exempt, I think that's what's proposed here. Because it's proposed that basically 1,500 is exempt, anything above 15, you pay tax. So is that correct, or am I reading it wrong?
So this would, sorry, this would be, the way it's currently written, the way it is currently in code today is any unit that is 1,000 square feet or smaller unit is exempt.
1,500.
The way it's written in code today, yeah. And we're proposing to change that to 1,500, the way that's written now, and subject to you all adjusting it how you see fit. However, what it doesn't say is the first 1,500 square feet. It is, so for example, under this scenario where it's 1,500 drafted here, if you were building a 3,000 square foot house, you'd pay it on all 3,000 square feet, right? And there's different approaches, and what I heard is that, you know, there's an opportunity for individual homeowners who are building it, that maybe they get the first 2,000 square feet is exempt. Then anything above that, they pay the fee on. So if you're building a 4,000 square foot house, then you paid it on 2,000 square feet. But that for production builders, that and all other units built that aren't an individual building a home, well, then you would use this exemption, which is any unit that is smaller than, you insert the number, is exempt. And you could create those two different categories. So I think the first question is, would you want to create those categories? And then the second question is, where would you want to set the dial in what notch? You know, 1,500, 2,000, what, you know, how would you set that? So I'll pass it back to you, but, you know, I understand what you're trying to achieve. And we could administer that. So my task is taking what you all recommend to the council and making sure we could actually administer it, and then whatever the council ends up landing on, that we could actually administer it. That's what my role is.
And it could be thankless at times, I'm sure. John, did you have anything else to add about that?
Yeah. Also, in previous presentations, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, almost all of our surrounding cities are doing some form of in lieu fee program for moderate and low-income housing.
Yeah, I don't have a list of them. However, my understanding is a majority of arch cities, which is most of the cities around us, are moving that way. They're all applying it in a little bit of a different manner. Many of those cities have higher density areas where it's easier to achieve that than through individual single family. However, they are all applying it on some level, as far as I'm aware, to single family as well.
And they started way back then when houses were affordable. They are not starting that today. When that makes a big difference. When houses were selling for $200,000, it was a completely different world.
Anything else? So we're going to wrap this up. Here's what I think we should do is, as I see it, there's probably two, could be more, but at least two things that we should focus on. And the first is whether there should be a exemption totally for owner-builder, or some formula that's the first 2,000 or 2,500 square feet or 1,500 exemption. If somebody wants to build, 3,000, then the 1,500 above the specified 1,500, if we change that, would apply. So I think we should work that first, see if we want that exclusion. Or maybe the other way around, is that oh, actually, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. John, you said something that I went back because I wasn't here on the meeting when this was discussed, and I must have missed that 1,500 that the builders said that they were okay with. Could you just summarize briefly about
So
I'm sure they don't want
yeah.
anything, but if,
So we in meeting with several builders, they identified that, they would prefer on any day to take a fee over building a unit. That's generally the sentiment I hear from builders, because it's predictable and they could pay the fee and walk away from it and not have to deal with it. However, there was concern about the exemption levels and how it would impact middle housing and whether it would result in a disincentive for people to actually pursue middle housing and for the smaller builders. So one of the smaller builders I met with raised an objection to the 1,000 square feet because, well, first of all, didn't really, didn't agree with the program overall. I want to be clear. That builder wasn't, coming in saying, "Oh, I love this program. I'm happy to do it," but did say that he understood what we were trying to achieve and that this is something that's becoming more common. But he was trying to find a way for it to pencil, because at the end of the day, if that's what we wanted to do as a city, he was fine with it. He just wanted to know that his project would pencil or not. So he indicated that he could achieve a 2-bedroom unit in 1,000 square foot, or he could achieve a 2-bedroom plus a flex space, an office space or a rec room or something in a 1,500 square feet, or he could achieve a 3-bedroom in a 1,500 square feet. And he saw that as, if we were trying to build Sammamish family style housing in middle housing, like a triplex or something, that he would absolutely see 1,500 as the minimum size that he would be trying to build. And he felt that if he was given an exemption from paying the in lieu fee because he was trying to achieve an affordable family unit based on square footage and trim, that he would walk from this. And that is the product he's been trying to find a way to build. He has been building them in other parts of the region, but would love to build them in Sammamish if the exemption was right. He also had some really good ideas about trying to build them out at a finish level that would allow homeowners to, over time, sweat equity finish them. So, working within what the building code requires. And it's a model that some other countries have. We've heard about these developments where you could actually get a warm shell with a minimal finish on the inside and buy that and then build it out yourself over time. So to answer your question, the 1,500 square feet was what he saw was the minimum exemption that would be needed for him to be able to start moving forward with projects in the city.
okay. And what that would do, and this is kind of for me, we want to set that square footage exemption level where it would actually encourage building at that level, because it'd be smaller units that would be more affordable. And I think at least a lot of the conversation has been, well, the penalty when you go above that. And so, like, hearing that one builder has some ideas where that 1,500 square feet works as a minimum is encouraging. I do wonder, frankly, and I didn't want to relitigate the stuff that had been done back before, but as I've thought through this stuff, it felt like at least a little bit more might encourage more of that, small houses to actually be built, as opposed to, well, I'll just take the hit on the fee and build something big, if that makes sense. So could we motivate more building of 1,700, 2,000 square feet units that would be more affordable than the 3,000 square foot stuff that's going in? And I don't know the answer for that. But if we'd like to change something, that's kind of the rationale that I would have, is if we would want to move that up a little bit or keep it as is because of the feedback that occurred back, a month ago. So.
Can I propose something else, a little bit different approach?
Sure, yeah.
What would happen, because all this, what we're hearing is the builders and assuming that the builder will come over and take over and purchase a property and they want to kind of add to it. Can we actually create two different groups? One is that the existing homeowners basically tie the exemptions to the ownership. If the owner wants to build that, would be exempt, and then the question is that what would be exemption? But if the developer purchased that property, then the exemptions would be higher or lower.
Actually, I think that's, well, not I think, that is where I was heading to. had mentioned doing the two. And at first I thought, well, should we talk about exempting the
Well, that would
homeowner
address
or
the
the
concern
property
that we heard from at
Exactly,
least one.
exactly. And then I thought, well, if there's going to be some discussion about maybe there's some portion that's exempt, if you want to build a 3,000 square foot home on your property.
As long as you're the owner of that property.
Right, right.
But if you sell that property, then you miss that exemption.
That gets all complicated then, but maybe. So actually, I was heading in the same direction. I think you were separating those two. What I thought would be a little bit cleaner is if we just decide, do we want to maintain that, actually accept the 1,500 square foot modification from what the code had been for the exemption for unit size, or move that to something greater than 1,500. I think clearly we don't want to keep it at 1,000, so there's a proposal in the rewrite to move to 1,500. Are we okay with that? Would we want to
Sean,
move
would
that higher?
you agree with that?
So I have a quick comment on that. I would support the 1,500, and then in the second part, where we might have further exemptions.
Right.
So, you're a single family building your own house, and you want to go to 1,700 square feet. Well, you only pay the in lieu fee on the extra 200 or something, so that we're kind of, I don't say splitting the middle, but we're trying to meet the city's goals around housing and provide more flexibility for the homeowner builder.
Well, we'll talk about that one.
Yeah,
But that's great, yeah.
But that's why
That's one way to do that.
The city's goals were met through the comprehensive plan. Those were met.
the state requirements were met through the
Yeah.
comp plan. But I think the council has given us policy direction.
This is an arch recommendation. This is that the city is asking us, is it good or is it not good? And if it's not good, why?
So I can think back to sometime in 2023 when I first started hearing from council members, when are we going to talk about a citywide inclusionary affordable housing program that requires all new development, including single-family homes, participates in some form of affordable housing? So while it is definitely rooted in Arch, I believe, and a lot of the background comes from Arch and those conversations, the city council majority has had interest in the city pursuing a citywide inclusionary affordable housing program above and beyond what our state mandate is and our compliance is with state rule, in order to try to go above and beyond and to try to find a way to start to grow affordable housing program. And they see that by way of new development, providing units or funding that could be used in lieu of units to be partnered or pooled off-site in different locations. So that's where that comes from.
If I play the numbers game and I say, how many single-family homes were built? Let's say if we look 5 years ago, how many single-family homes were built? And if we apply this 10% rule to those and see how much funds could we have collected from those, and accordingly, how many subsidized homes could we have provided, and will it fill the delta? Because the delta you mentioned earlier, between 400 and 1.2 million, that's huge. If we collect 10% from everyone who's going to build anything, forget about 1,000, 500 square feet, how much money are we achieving? Will it allow us to achieve our goal of providing affordable housing?
Maybe one home. Maybe one home.
Exactly. Maybe one house. Maybe we will do one house, but the damage that we will do will be citywide. And this is where I'm concerned, that unintended consequences are worse than what we are trying to achieve. And I know we only have 10 more minutes. I feel we need to set this topic aside and we come back and we talk about options and we talk about numbers and we weigh the benefits. if there are real benefits before we move it forward.
Yeah, I'm wondering, because this is not clean. I recall in the past that we have, I don't know if it's a dissenting opinion or something like that in the letter that goes to council, but a clear statement, and we'd work the wording and share it, by email, that says that after our debate, and we could vote on this to see where we're really at, but there definitely is a tone here among all of us that this is very burdensome on the community, and there are the potential for unintended consequences that will actually be negative in terms of achieving our goals. And we could work the wording to basically state that and share that thinking with the council. And I know a number of the council members watch these, and so they would be encouraged to listen to the conversations. And that gives us a little bit of an out, if you will, and to make our thinking known. I do have to come back to saying, that the code has been approved, and we're talking about some modifications to the approved code, one of which is to change the exemption on floor area from 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. And where that came from was some recommendations from builders in a discussion back in the beginning of March, right? And so we should decide whether we want to accept that modification or modify it. And if we were to modify it, the conversation has been to increase that from 1,500 to some number.
Chairman, can I ask you a question? Is there an urgency on this to finalize this at this meeting, or can be?
It's in place in the code currently, and applications that come in the door vest to it. So we want to try to make that adjustment that we see now. If the commission, the one option is to simply vote on what's in front of you. And if you decline to change it, we will bring that to council, and the council can move forward and do what they want with it. On the other hand, if you wanted to add some recommendations for things that you might want to see included in it, we could bring that to council, and then they can do what they want with that. We could also include the alternative perspectives in the memo that goes to the council on this. So those generally seem to be the options, is vote on what is queued up here on the screen, or could be on the screen and in the agenda packet. And if you chose to not support that, then we would not change it. And if you wanted to amend it and vote on that, then we would, and you supported those amendments, we would take those. And if you wanted to take either of those actions and wanted us to add an alternative perspective component to that recommendation, we would do that as well. But what I don't think is in the cards is not taking action, because not taking action, we would find in the negative that you are voting to decline making these changes, and we would take that to the council accordingly.
Let me make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman. What would happen if you go with the approving and supporting all the exhibits that we talked about when we voted on it, with the exception of 6, and then bring it back at a certain time and discuss it further?
Well, if we don't, then 6 would retain the 1,000 square foot exemption, not 1,500, and it would not allow exclusion for units being rebuilt. So it's actually worse, if you will, and that's the current code that people are looking at and trying to make decisions from.
So I'd like to make a motion to move this along to vote and discussion. And there's going to be disagreement with this. So I move that we accept the proposed changes as presented by staff. Include a note to council that we discussed further exemptions, particularly for single-family home and property owners building their own home, but did not arrive at a recommended exemption level. So that would change that would be my motion, that would change the code so you can get the 1,500 in right away and then work on the other exemption.
So that's a motion. Is there a second?
Second for discussion or second for vote?
Well, second, we'll always have discussion, so. Second would indicate that you're willing to have that conversation. If nobody seconds, the motion will die.
Can you go over, John, can you go over with the exception of what? That how would we bring it back? How would give the message to the council that there was no 100% agreement on it when we wanted to have more time to discuss it and bring that one as a separate item?
That would be embedded in the motion that we couldn't reach a
Consensus.
we didn't have time to reach a consensus on what the exception for single-family building, their own single-family home would be, or how that would look. But it was discussed and considered, and that could be written up in the letter.
I will say from a calendar perspective, the next time we could get this topic back in front of you will probably be September.
Wow.
That's okay. But I would like in the letter to say that we're not accepting the 10%, not just for the single-family homes, across the board. Because again, I go back to my point. You increase the price of the new houses, you are increasing the prices of the existing ones no matter what. You increase those prices, you increasing the taxes. You are taxing people out of their homes.
But the code's already there.
I understand.
So-
I'm just saying it loud and clear.
Yeah.
But how could one of the member of the planning commission's position should be reflected in the letter so the council is aware that we discussed this, even though that there is not 100% agreement to it?
Yeah, would absolutely do that.
Did you see any problem?
And we would circle that around. To follow Robert's rules, if we have a second to your motion, we'll discuss that motion. If not, it dies and we can make another motion. So is there a second? Okay. So that we'll need to try another motion or another suggestion. There actually was a motion to accept all of this as written, and we were discussing amendments.
So I have a motion to extend our meeting by 30 minutes.
Oh,
I second.
okay, that one gets seconded. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
So I have this.
If I might. I think there seems to be a head nod that the exemptions we're looking at tonight of at least increasing to 1,500 square feet is better than 1,000, and exempting homes being rebuilt is better than not.
Yep.
That we should at the very least potentially recommend as a commission to move those forward. And we could also, in the letter, create a section that the Planning Commission recommends further opportunity in the future to consider further exemptions to this chapter and bring those recommendations back to the council at a later date. We don't have to determine the date right now, but if we don't take action to move these forward, the existing, what we all seem to agree are worse conditions will stay in place. And I'll also add a reminder that the council didn't ask the commission to consider if the 10% affordability requirement is appropriate. That's not what they asked to look at. They asked for a review of the exemptions. So just as a reminder of kind of setting the bounds on the conversation and what they're looking for input on, it's the exemptions. So.
Yeah.
So the door is closed as far as discussion on the 10%. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's in the code. Yeah.
Which is supported by policy statements in the comprehensive plan, which the council just, approved. I mean, I can picture Councilmember Lamb explicitly asking for the policy statement for inclusionary zoning in November. So, correct, that door is sort of shut. We're looking at exemptions.
Hey, Evan, I think that was really well stated. I would be interested in having a short discussion, and then whether we want to make this as an amendment to the modifications or not, is adding an exclusion for the property owner builder. And my basis for that is some of the comments that we heard tonight and sort of a small sample set of a few people that I talked to that said, hey, if I've got a piece of property and I'm building on it, this is so unfair to be basically, paying into the fee in lieu. Nobody was like, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Now, obviously, it would be money coming out of their pocket. But the rationale was, it's my property. And David, you've mentioned many times about, sort of the ownership of property is really important. It's sacrosanct, that people have their property. And so for me, as I've gone through this, I would wholeheartedly vote for a motion that accepts the code modifications that are shown here, the 1,500, the units being built, adding the cottages. I also would like to see if we can have a motion to amend it to exclude owner, however we would phrase that, owner, owned property, builder, owner, whatever the right phrasing would be. It's quite a burden on folks and limits, their rights around property. So.
But how would you?
I do think that those will, on the margin, add to the fee. It's not going to make or break whether we can build affordable housing or not. So, anyways, so if that makes sense, I'd entertain a motion to amend the exemptions to add the individual property owner builder.
By the way, it's 9:03.
We did extend, yeah, till 9:30. That was a
Or-
successful motion we just
Got
had a
it.
few moments ago.
Got it. Okay.
So I second your motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so there was a motion to add an exemption for the owner builder. Does that make sense? And we could work on the exact phrasing, but that's the intent that we have here. Any discussion on that motion?
Yes. Can we amend it to increase the size to 3,000 and request that we come back and have further discussions?
That would be, actually, that's a separate issue. So
Okay.
there was one.
Stay with the 3,000s.
If you look at the list of exemptions, there's one that has that 1,500, changed from 1,000 to 1,500. There's another one that's the internal subdivision. There's another one, garage conversions. I'm suggesting adding yet another one that talks about exempting the property owner who's going to build on their property.
Period, regardless of the size?
Yes,
And there was another one that John suggested that,
with some sort of compromise. I'm not
Exactly.
suggesting that. If you own the property and you're building on your property, I'm saying you would be exempt from the fee in lieu. That's my motion.
Okay, I'm good with that.
I thought you would be. So
is
does
there
that-
already three votes? 1, 2, 3?
Well, I said it was, so we had some discussion. Any other discussion on that?
No, I think we could go there.
Okay, so for that amendment to add an additional exemption for the property owner builder, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. So that amendment goes. And we have gone around and around on the 1,500. We will put into the letter that we think there needs to be some further analysis, really, on the impacts of the square footage level of exclusion. And we need, frankly, for me to know whether it's 1,500 or 3,000, I could only use gut feel. I think, Hisham, you're talking about what the impact would be and what would the analysis. I'd love to see that. It could be very meaningful. So what we had originally was to accept the changes. So that was the 1,500, that was the units being built, you know, the ones that are shown here in whatever, section 4, exemptions, whatever it is. And we've made an amendment to that to add an exemption for the property owner. So for that original motion as amended, any further discussion? Huh? Oh, yeah, yeah. And remembering that we will have a note about that the city council should sit and watch the hour-long discussion.
So let's get clarification between two motions. Motion number one basically support the staff's recommendation as it is written and discussed. That's motion number one, which is called, you call it original.
Right.
The amended motion, Mr. Chairman, that's what you proposed, and you got the not support of 3.
Yep.
Which makes it, not only supports the staff position, but the owner occupied increase in the square footage would be exempt.
Yeah, can you bring up just to be absolutely clear?
Owner occupied increasing the square footage or an owner building new? I'm talking about building new.
Well, there's other.
This only applies to new. Yep. So what you're saying.
I'm doing anything for myself, I'm not paying a tax. Any size.
Wait a minute. What is definition of new? If I'm adding, that is not a new.
New housing unit, new residential.
So again,
housing
I have 1,000 square foot. I'm adding 500 to it.
That's
Is that a
exempt.
new?
You're expanding an existing unit. You're not adding a new unit. So we're talking for new units only. Yep.
So in that example that a gentleman sits in the audience, he's talking about an existing home. He adds. So under this proposal, he would not have to pay any fees.
Correct. If he's adding, and I think there
That
was
is
some.
the amendment motion.
It's already in the code that way.
Yeah, that's how it already exists. And I think there was a public commenter who was saying they wanted to build a new housing unit on their family's property. So under the chair's new exemption, he would be exempt from paying the fee.
Another ad, if someone who has a big family like him, who needs more than 3,000 square feet, will he be taxed for anything?
Well, let's take a look at the exemptions here. So what we agreed to in that amendment is that there would be an additional exemption. So we've got the 1,500 as an exemption below that. The internal subdivision of existing structure, blah, blah, blah. There would be an additional one, so it'd be item F, right? That would talk about the property owner who's building new. Okay, so that's what we've passed. And then the original motion basically said we would accept the stuff that's in red here, the red lines.
Yes.
As per recommendation from staff. We've amended that to add section F, right? So now what we're proposing is to vote on that original motion. It said these are good with the amendment. And we would include in our letter to council that we debated and have concerns about the 1,500 square foot level for the exemptions. And we have concerns about basically the whole fee in lieu structure for encouraging affordable housing. Well, we very much agree on the need for affordable housing. We would have, wording like that, and I could work on that.
Would it be possible to put a deadline sort of saying, okay, this item will come back to us in September, right, and making it as a wish list?
I mean, the most you can do is recommend the council allow you that opportunity, and then they decide if they want to do that. So we'll see what they say based
If the
on.
language is there that
Yeah.
we would like to bring this one back.
They could see the changes and say, no, this is good. We like it how it is, and thank you for your recommendation. But we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we've had a lot of conversation. I'm ready to ask for a vote. So all in favor of that original motion as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, so that passes. And we'll work on a letter. Yes. Okay. What else?
That's it. I think that's it.
We've got a calendar coming up, so we've got a,
You know, and I don't have it open
that-
at the top of my head at 9/11, so check it out online.
yes, the meetings are back to their normal cadence, yeah. All right.
There is a proposed meeting on August 7th.
All right, so the next thing is to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yes.